Good morning. Welcome to King's Report News Hour for the first day now of the ninth month. Yes, we finally made it to the ninth month. First day of the ninth month, 16th year of Changi. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Changi, Jimun. Let's take our normal jaunt around the kingdom and see what's going on. Right now, in Chongpyeong, Tennessee, we have 39 degrees and clear. Partly sunny today, high of 61 tonight, partly cloudy, low of 43. Father's hometown, Cheongju in North Pyongan province in what is today North Korea, 32 and clear right now, getting down to 28 tonight, clear and cold. Tomorrow, plenty of sunshine, high of 56. And at the Cheonryung Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania, currently 39 and clear, and getting up to 66 today, mostly sunny and pleasant. Tonight, mainly cloudy with a couple of showers, low of 46. At the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, 71 and mostly cloudy, breezy and not as hot with plenty of sun, high of 82. Tonight, clear and cooler, low of 52. And at the Suncheon Palace in Korea, 59 and mostly cloudy, getting down to 49 tonight with under rather cloudy skies. Tomorrow, partly sunny and high of 71. At the Gunma Palaces in Japan, 59 and mostly cloudy, and 47 tonight. For a low tomorrow, cloudy with a shower in the area, high of 60. And in Guangzhou and Guangdong province, 67 and overcast, windy and not as warm with a thick cloud cover. Heavy showers this morning, followed by periods of rain this afternoon, high of 68 today. And then overcast and windy tonight, a low of 62. Let's go to Father's Word right now, and let's see where we are today. We're in the final book. Is true families. I would say true families. Let's put that in plural rather than singular. True families and a family pledge. And right now we are in the second chapter of that, where Father goes through each of the phrases, clauses, and we're in the one in verse 2. We're in verse 2 about patriot, or I'm sorry, filial child in the family, patriot in the nation, saint in the world, and the divine son and daughter or daughter in the cosmos. And the 가정의 도리를 완성, completing the, in the English is translated dutiful way of family, right? And that's how they kind of try to pronounce a tori, translate tori. And I've explained about tori, but in case anyone has missed it, it's what you're expected, what the society, sort of the societal norms, I guess, or the norms are, not societal norms, God's norms are for you or for a person, depending on what position they're in. So, for example, a father in the family, the son, the daughter, the mother, we all have certain things that we are to do as a father or a son or as a mother or daughter. And so that's what Tori refers to. So dutiful way is kind of, I guess it kind of gets that. Well, there's never a one-to-one translation. Okay, so to say it's a bad translation would be inaccurate because if it's the closest possible you can get, then it's a good translation. There are never one-to-one matches in translations. Even if you, the example I give is the word apple, for example, right? Sagwa in Korean, ringo in Japanese. But an American, if you say apple, then you're not saying the same thing as a Korean who says sagwa or a Japanese who says ringo, right? Japanese ringo, maybe they're thinking of something from Aomori Prefecture. And, or anyway, it's not the same. Even in something that seems like sagwa equals ringo equals, what am I missing? Sagwa equals ringo equals apple. There's still slight differences. So, especially in something like a esoteric term like tori, can't possibly translate that exactly because it comes from a culture and a civilization that is different from the culture and civilization that gave rise to the English language. So you just have to learn that on the in the context. So anyway, let's see here what Father says about Tori. If we can find that here, let's see in the first sentence here. Father says 가정에 있어서, so in the family, 효자 효녀는 어떤 사람이냐? What kind of person is a dutiful the son or dutiful daughter? Okay? 부모를 위해서 몸 마음을 희생하더라도 그것을 so even if you um, sacrifice your body and mind for the sake of the parents, even if you do that, 그것을 넘고 넘어서 부모를 사랑하고 싶다고 하는 사람을 효자효녀라고 하는 것입니다. So even if a person does that, they sacrifice their mind and body for the sake of the parents, but still, they want to go beyond that. And they want to love their parents beyond what they've already done before, beyond just sacrificing their mind and body. That is the person that we refer to as a filial son or filial daughter. So what is a patriot? 애국자는 뭐냐? 국가를 위해서 자기의 일신을 돌보지 아니하고. So someone who, for the sake of the nation, does not is not concerned about their own self, about their own self. 일신을 돌보지 아니하고 희생을 하고 또 하고. So to sacrifice themselves, sacrifice, and sacrifice 또 하고 투입하고, and then invest invest themselves. 잊어버리는 그런 사람이 진정한 애국자입니다. And so to sacrifice and again and again and again and invest themselves, and then they're not concerned about what they've done. They don't keep tabs. They don't remember what they've done. They don't even, of course, they remember, but they don't they don't keep account. They don't keep account of what they've done. That is the person we refer to as a true patriot. A person who invests themselves 10 times, but then doesn't keep tabs for that. The fathers uses the word 잊어버리는, so forget about that, but they don't keep account. They don't keep account of that. So if there is such a person, then the person who invests 11 times, okay, 11 times, and goes one more beyond everybody else who's done 10 times, but there's one person who does 11 times. And that person is the 주체. That person is the subject partner. All right. So on that basic principle, okay, this is a small p principle, right? Not the capital P principle. This is a small. So on that principle, everything then is arranged in peace. Will become peace. Okay. 사랑을 빼고서는 외하여 사는 길을 빼고서는 그것을 이룰 수 있는 길은 없습니다. So if you leave love out, if you leave out the path of living for the sake of others, there is no way of accomplishing this. All right? March 10th, 1994. Praise God for the word that he's given us this morning. Okay. All right, so okay, let's then see what is going on today. And of course, we know that the fourth plenum is going on in China, and I'm sure they're working very hard at that. And well, there was no war last weekend. There was no war in an attempt to cancel the fourth plenum. It is, in fact, actually going on. And what we understand is that the people there, about 300 people, is it roughly, including official delegates and the alternates of the Central Committee, they are discussing the next 5-year plan, in which they will, I guess, decide. Interesting, Korea used to have 5-year plans. I don't think they do anymore. But Park Chung-hee introduced the idea of 5-year plans, and I think maybe he got it from the communists and thought that was a good idea. And it was Park Chung-hee was pretty successful in setting the foundation for today's Korea. Of course, Korea right now, the problem with Korea right now is that Park Chung-hee set the foundation, and they did very well in shipbuilding, in auto manufacturing. What else? In electronics. Uh, but what are the common denominators of all these? Steel, manufacturing stuff like that, exporting steel. What are the common denominators of all those industries right now? China does it better. That's Korea's problem today, or at least China does it as well and cheaper. Okay, so that is Korea's problem, and so Korea, the next few years probably uh, may have some serious difficulties because basically China looked at what Korea did and said, "Hey, yeah, good idea. Well, let's copy Korea. Let's do what Korea did. Only let's not pay our workers as much. Let's use we got some slaves here. Let's use the slave labor, and we can undercut Korea, and they've done very well at that. So we'll see what happens to Korea's economy over the next few years. But probably, a lot of. I'm not a financial advisor, not giving financial advice here, but it looks like Korea is going to have a tough time over the next several years. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay. All right. So right now, that's going on, and let's see here. I have a story here. This is an opinion piece that actually I've been saving for a couple of days, and it's titled "Trade with China is not worth humiliating ourselves for," and this, of course, is reference to the U.S. position. Let's take a look at what they're saying here. Okay. Okay, I guess this is not U.S., but also I think believes it also applies to the U.S. as well. And this is in the this is in the Telegraph. Okay, so this is a British publication. We can't afford to strike. We can't afford to sacrifice the trade links. The exports are vital for what remains of British manufacturing, and we desperately need the investment. As the scandal surrounding the Chinese spying allegations and approval of its super embassy in London rumbles on, there's always one assumption in the background that we can't afford to annoy Beijing. And unfortunately, a lot of sort of globalists, especially the Davos type people, the World Economic Forum type people, the other sort of people who are riding the white horse of the apocalypse, they agree with that. That we can't, let's not annoy Beijing. Let's not poke well, in this case, the dragon, uh, because they may come after us. Hold on, though. China accounts for a tiny fraction of overall exports, and right now it is in decline. And that's true. It is. Its investors are pulling out of the UK. Sure, the China trade is worth having if it's there, but it's not worth humiliating ourselves for. There are far better opportunities for British business. The details of the China spying scandal are more than adequately covered elsewhere in the Telegraph, and yet even before that erupted, Sir Keir Starmer's government was constantly kowtowing to Beijing. Well, that's because they're leftists. Starmer is a Labour Party. Labour Party is a leftist party, and they, of course, want to follow Beijing. The Prime Minister was continuously promising better relations, and Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was flying off to Chinese capital to try to drum up more investment in the UK. The message is always the same. We may not like the regime. We may disapprove of the record of human rights. Its support for Vladimir Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, its blatant monitoring of Chinese citizens in the UK, or its attempts to increase its influence over our universities. Well, that's a pretty long list, but it comes with a but. But it's too important to ignore. They got a long list of things they don't like, but it's too important to ignore. The UK is so dependent on China for trade and investment that we have no other choice but to take a deep breath, tolerate the provocations, and keep relations as smooth as possible. I wonder if this author is realizing the historical irony here, right? Compare that to the way that the UK was relating to China in the 19th century, beginning of 20th century. And now things have completely turned around. Back then, China was uh, um, just the Shanghai, or the concessions that the UK, France, Germany, who else? Concessions that they had there in China. In other words, basically, concessions were pieces of territory where British law applied, or German law applied, or French law applied, and Chinese law didn't apply. It was a humiliating experience for China. And now this person is saying, let's not humiliate ourselves for China. So yeah, history has a way of doing that. Of course, we can all see the kinds of arguments that might be set out in a memo from a Treasury official. China is the second largest economy in the world, and on some projections may soon be the largest. Well, already is, in other words, in the PPP, the purchasing power parity comparison, some people say that China is already the largest economy in the world, that it's already larger than the United States. Um, Even with a few wobbles, it is growing at a rate that puts you know, it's growing at a rate that uh, that puts the West and certainly the whole of Europe to shame. Well, that is true if you believe the numbers that are being put out by the Chinese Communist Party. If you trust their numbers, which I don't know, I don't know. I'm not an economic expert or anything like that. But what I do know one thing: communists lie, and it's okay to lie because remember their morality is different. They don't subscribe to the uh, Moses's Ten Commandments, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness. They don't subscribe to that. No. So what do they subscribe to? Well, they subscribe to the thou shalt not undermine the power and position of the Chinese Communist Party. And anything that contributes to the power and position of the Chinese Communist Party is okay. So if they are putting out growth numbers that put the West and certainly the whole of Europe to shame, right? Does that contribute to the power and position of the Chinese Communist Party? Of course it does. So are those numbers true? Are they accurate? There are, people who, especially, I think, especially in Japan. Although Japan, interestingly, does not have an actual intelligence agency that works overseas, they have some of the best intelligence because their companies, their Zaibatsu, or they're not Zaibatsu anymore. That was before the Second World War, but still, the sort of the big companies, um, they station people outside of Chinese factories, and they count the number of trucks going in and out. Right? They count the number of smokestacks, if it's relevant, that are actually producing smoke. And so they actually have some pretty good information on what's actually happening in China. They don't share it very much with the rest of the world, but they seem to know a lot about what's actually going on in China. And I would recommend this person to maybe make some friends among some high-level people in Japan's large businesses to give them actual information on what's actually going on there, the growth rate of the Chinese economy or lack thereof. Yeah. And it may not be growing at all. A relatively small economy such as the UK with stagnant growth and fewer major industries left can't afford to ignore it. Even more seriously, we depend on China for a kit that will enable us to meet out our zero targets. Virtually all the solar panels are made there. And while there are no official figures on its holding of U.S. gilts, that's the bonds, the British bonds, that's what they're called, we have to assume they are substantial. We are in no position to be fussy about whom we do business with. Well, perhaps, and yet look more closely, and China is not as important to the British economy as you might imagine. Last year, it ranked fifth among the UK's trading partners with total exports worth 28 billion pounds, split roughly equally between services and physical products. Yeah, they actually fell by 12% last year, even though Britain's overall exports were relatively healthy. So this kind of information may be more reliable than to just take the Chinese figures at face value. As for inward investment, China accounted for a mere 0.2% of the total. With punitive taxes and stagnating growth, nobody wants to invest in Britain very much right now, but Chinese companies appear even less interested than everyone else. Indeed, where they have invested, the Chinese seem keen to get out as quickly as possible. Just look at the way the Xinjiang Group pulled out of British Steel earlier this year. Again, it is hard to blame them. With our sky high energy prices, UK steel manufacturing is hardly a very attractive business, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, yeah, so okay, this is not turning out to be as interesting as I had hoped. Of course, we should maintain good trade links and do business with China where we can, so long as it does not compromise national security. But it is not worth humiliating ourselves just to keep trade and investment flowing. It doesn't exist, and there is no point and pretending it does. All right. I think we have another story here um, about rare earth curbs threaten Europe's defense and economy, according to the experts. This may give us a better idea of China's role in the UK and Europe. Beijing's dominance in rare earth processing and magnet production leaves Europe vulnerable to supply disruptions in key industries, it says. And well, President Trump recently, just in the last day or so, signed an important agreement with Australia, and they're going to be investing what? How much is it? Billions of dollars over the next 6 months in the rare earth uh, industry. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Okay. So, okay. So anyway, let's take a look at this. But also, before we do that, let's take a look at this because I think this is actually probably a more serious situation. World faces most fragile security moment since World War II. RIA cites Russian spy chief. Now, RIA is a Russian operation, so it's a Russian media agency, but it's being carried by Reuters, which is interesting. So Reuters must have some kind of reason to give credibility to this. So let's take a look at this. The fragility of world security is unmatched since World War II, requiring willingness to compromise to avoid a new global conflict. Russia's RIA agency cited Sergei Naryshkin, head of Russia's SVR intelligence service, as saying on Tuesday, the world is now experiencing the most fragile moment for international security since World War II, namely a period of qualitative transformation of the global order, RIA cited Naryshkin as saying. Naryshkin said there is a fierce struggle between the largest global and regional centers of power to define the rules of future world order. Okay, so what would be those largest global and regional centers of power? Well, of course, the U.S. would be number one, Russia, China, India, perhaps, and Iran, perhaps. Anyway, so is Europe also one of those? I don't know. Our shared and perhaps principal task is to ensure that adaptation to the new reality proceeds without a major war, as has happened at previous historical stages. Naryshkin was quoted as saying. Okay, that would be nice if we could do that. He also repeated the Kremlin standard line that the administration of the President Zelensky is hindering the peace process in Ukraine. All right. Russia launched the war in Ukraine with a full-scale invasion of the country in February 2022. All right, well, that's the end of that story. A very short but very important story, I think, because there is this fierce struggle going on. Okay, and he says that we're at the most fragile security moment since World War II. All right. So then China is, of course, one of those security powers that's doing that. They're participating in a fierce struggle. And it's at the same time that China is trying to secure itself in the new world order, there's something going on within China as well, where Xi Jinping is trying to hold on to power, but there are other people who are sort of trying to challenge him. And there are various people on YouTube claiming to know what they're talking about and claiming to tell us what's going on in China. But as I said, we need to be conservative about who we believe. And so we don't know exactly how all that is going to take place, how that's going to go forth. But we do know that China has put curbs on our rare earth exports. And so let's see what this means for Europe. Could severely disrupt Europe's defense and economic sectors, experts warn, with calls mounting for concrete EU-US cooperation to counter Beijing's control over these critical minerals. EU industry chief Stephanie Sejourne met with affected European businesses on October 20th to discuss Beijing's rare earth restrictions, according to AFP. AFP is a French wire service. The virtual meeting included executives from automotive, defense, wind energy, chemicals, and mining sectors. Beijing tightened its exports controls on rare earth minerals on October 9th, mandating licenses for products exceeding a 0.1% content threshold. So we talked about this yesterday, right? That what the Beijing is doing and whether they can actually enforce that. The example we saw yesterday was because they want even products that are produced in countries other than China or other than US, for example. For example, if someone in the Philippines, a company in the Philippines produces something that they're going to export to the United States, okay, and it contains 0.11% of the product is China's rare earth, okay. Number one, how does China know that it has 0.11% and not 0.09%? How does China know that? And then number two, um, how is China going to keep track of all these products being produced all around the world, and how much of China's rare earths are in each of one of those and being exported, all that kind of stuff. So the person that we read yesterday, said there's no way that China can actually follow through on this, especially the third country exports. What China is saying is that basically they're going to hold the ability to shut down the world economy. Now China is saying, "Oh, no, you guys are overreacting." I don't think so. I mean, if someone has the capability to do something, we got to assume that they're going to do it. So if they have the capability to shut down the world economy, if they have they're giving themselves that capability. We have to assume that at some point in time, perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not this year or next year, but at some point in time, they're going to exercise that capability. So China is really setting themselves up then to be attacked by those who are going to say, "Hey, wait a second, we can't live in a world like that. You guys have got to give something." So we'll see. Some people say that China shot themselves in the foot by doing this. Anyway, let's see what's going on. Okay. All right. So the new rules apply to foreign firms. Okay. Using Chinese sourced raw materials or Chinese technology for extraction, refining, magnet making, or recycling, with most restrictions taking effect December 1. Some restrictions will take place on November 1, but most of them December 1. And it's especially the third country restrictions, in other words, products produced in Philippines or other places outside of China and that are going to be affected December 1. Europe's defense industry is at risk. So this chief economist for Asia Pacific at Next, anyway, this research company warned the restrictions exploit Europe's heavy dependence on China. She said China is basically weaponizing its relations with Europe, which is a move that may leave some European defense companies heavily affected. The 5 new ones they have now included are even more pervasive, especially for precision weaponry. The 5 new rare earth minerals. This is important for Europe now because Europe is starting to manufacture its own precision ammunition, and that hits the European defense plan directly. This person told the Epoch Times. Okay, according to China's Ministry of Commerce, the 5 additional rare earth elements are, and you can look them here, bringing the total number of controlled rare earth elements to 12. Echoing this analyst's view, a senior advisor at EIT Raw Materials said Europe will likely have to contend with the immediate impact on producing critical defense components like semiconductors and chips, as the continent lacks alternative sources for refined rare earths. EIT Raw Materials is an EU-funded organization focused on critical materials. They're taking different steps like funding different projects and collaborating with third countries. This effort will bear fruit in a couple of years, maybe by 2030, but in the short term, Europe will struggle with how to solve this, Mancheri told the Epoch Times. Gavin Harper, a critical materials research fellow at the University of Birmingham in UK, identified military drones as key strategic vulnerability for Europe's defense autonomy, citing Beijing's control over rare earth magnets essential for their production. Rare earth magnets are used in the motors that drive drones' propellers and may also be used in the actuators of a range of drones. China's control of the rare earth supply chain may pose a strategic risk to other militaries wishing to build drones at scale, Harper told the Epoch Times. So clearly, China is trying to take control of Europe's ability to produce weapons, and Europe has to bow down to China, basically, right, in order to be able to produce these weapons. So that kind of so that's part of what the Russian guy was saying a minute ago. This fierce struggle to define the rules of the new world order, and China is trying to create a world order where they are number one. Why? Because they have the rare earths, and everybody else is dependent on them. Man, Trump is going to have a time with Xi Jinping when he meets him in South Korea. Uh, I guess within the next week or so, week or week and a half. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to be a fly on the wall for that meeting? Yeah. I think President Trump is going to tell him, listen, you guys cannot play the game this way. You guys cannot do this. Because if you do, we're going to have to respond. We have our national interests to protect. And right now, you are threatening those national interests, not only Europe, but also the United States and also Japan, also Korea, basically the entire world. And the world, you know what, is not going to bow down to you guys. It is not going to bow down. You are not OPEC in the 1970s. It's a different world today, and you cannot try to mimic what they did. Mm. We will see. We will see what happens at that meeting. Yeah. But the impact extends far beyond defense, as Enrique Danz, a professor of notes that the new controls leave Europe's economy substantially vulnerable, with the true choke point being China's dominance over the processing of rare earths into permanent magnets. The permanent magnet production sits at the core of electric vehicles, wind turbines, and many industrial electronic systems. So the real disruption does not come from a lack of raw material, but mostly from a lack of refining and magnet production outside China, Danz told the Epoch Times. But they want to control also the refining and magnet production outside China, because you cannot use Chinese technology, you cannot use the rare earths more than 0.1%. And so they're really overstepping, I think, here. China's dominance in the rare earth sector includes roughly 70% of rare earth mining, 90% of separation and processing, and 93% of magnet manufacturing, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So how did we get this way, right? a number of articles have said that, yeah, actually, rare earths don't just exist in China, they exist all over the world. They exist in America, they exist in Japan. But the thing is that the other places have decided that it's better to import from China than to bear the environmental damage that mining earth causes. So I guess it's the climate change people that have put us in this situation, right? Or the environmentalists, I guess. So anyway, here we are. Here we are. Dan predicted that the automotive and renewable industries could expect delays, cost increases, and temporary stoppages in the short term, highlighting a systemic risk to the Eurozone economy that stems from its reliance on Chinese facilities to refine these critical minerals. Right? And you know what? People are worried about whether Xi Jinping is going to survive as leader or not. That's not relevant here. If someone else takes over, they're going to follow this same policy. So, who is at the head of the Chinese Communist Party is not really all that important in this story, right? Unless the Communist Party itself is somehow um, overthrown or brought down, but doesn't look like that's going to happen. At least, to us. The European Central Bank has warned of the Eurozone exposure and documented production disruptions tied to sudden drops in magnet shipments. Definitely, it's an impact that they will feel, Dan said. Harper worried that China's controls on rare earth magnet exports will prove problematic to the supply chains of these industries, as well as sources of these components are limited and will take time to develop. It's going to take time, yeah. The equipment used to make these magnets is also coming under export control, which will make it more difficult for the West to establish its own alternative processing routes and supply chains, he said. Amid these challenges, the Danish foreign minister called for a tough response from the EU, while noting that this is an area where the bloc shares a common interest with the United States. So all of a sudden, Europe has to go begging to President Trump. Yeah. Shortly after, G7 finance ministers agreed on October 16th to coordinate their response to China's latest rare earth export restrictions. Regarding potential cooperation, Herrero said Europe could team up with Japan to mitigate the impact of China's export controls, given that Japan has some rare earth refining capacity, but cautioned this may not be enough. Without the US, it will be difficult because both fear China's reaction. Ah, that's what we were just reading about in the other article, right? People don't want to poke the dragon. Dan said EU-US coordination is necessary, but far from sufficient, noting that both sides must implement concrete actions in the coming months. Actions needed range from coordinating export licenses to unblock stock shipments, joint purchasing to improve bargaining power, and temporary price support to make any non-Chinese processing project doable. You need to make them bankable, he said. So for the medium to long term, Dan's emphasized the importance of meeting the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act 10% targets of 10% extraction, 40% processing, and 25% recycling by 2030, creating shared heavy rare earth separation capacity, and standardizing defense specifications to ensure transatlantic component interchangeability. The real test will be whether they can build refineries, recycling hubs, and long-term offtake contracts fast enough to counter Beijing's leverage, Dan said. So all of a sudden, we're not talking about carbon anymore. We're not talking about um, uh, uh, these what is it, the gases, right? Climate change. We're not talking about climate change anymore. We're talking about what are we going to do about the rare earths. So we wanted to please the climate people and the environment people, uh, and of course China ignored those people, and they ignored all the environmental damage that this was causing, and also human rights damage because people who are working in those mines are in really terrible working conditions. They're inhaling all sorts of toxic dust and everything like that. And China just ignores all that because they have one goal: to dominate the world with communism. So here we are. Here we are, folks. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. What's going to happen? I don't know. I don't know. So we shall see what happens, and we'll continue to monitor this. Okay. Also, okay, so one of the big news items today is the election of Takaichi Sanae as a Japan's prime minister. We've been following that, and Takaichi is one of the people that, whereas actually the person that our Blessed Center families in Japan have been supporting. So I'm sure they're very happy about this. So let's take a look at this. Okay. This is an AP story, a very leftist outlet. Japan's parliament elected ultra conservative. Okay, right away, AP is showing its colors. They're ultra conservative, right? Not just conservative, ultra conservative. Well, I guess I guess we should consider ourselves fortunate that they didn't call her far right. Anyway, Sanae Takaichi as the country's first female prime minister Tuesday, a day after her struggling party struck a coalition deal with a new partner, expected to pull her governing bloc further to the right. Takeichi replaces Shigeru Ishiba, ending a 3-month political vacuum and wrangling since the Liberal Democratic Party's disastrous election loss in July. Ishiba, who lasted only 1 year as prime minister, resigned with his cabinet earlier in the day, paving the way for his successor. Takaichi won 237 votes, 4 more than a majority, compared to 149 won by Yoshihiko Noda, head of the largest opposition party, the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, in the lower house, which elects the prime minister. Even though her coalition was 2 seats short of the majority, Takaichi received enough votes to win in the first round. She likely received votes from lawmakers in fringe minority parties from whom she has sought cooperation. As the results were announced, Takaichi stood up and bowed deeply. Takaichi, 64, appointed former Defense Minister Minoru Kihara as Chief Cabinet Secretary, and she appointed her leadership rivals within the party to her government along with other veteran lawmakers. And that's typical LDP style. You want to keep everybody in the family and got to keep everybody happy. Toshimitsu Motogi, who previously served as both trade and foreign ministers, was named foreign minister. And so, all these positions were announced within an hour after she was elected. So that tells you what's been going on. People were saying, "Oh, is Takaichi going to get enough votes? Is she going to get enough votes?" But all that was happening was that she was just calling people up and saying, "Hey, I'll give you foreign minister, all right? So help me here," and that kind of thing. Former agricultural minister Shinjiro Koizumi was named defense minister. All right, and despite her earlier pledge to drastically increase the number of women in the cabinet, she appointed only 3, all of them supporters in the party leadership vote. Okay, so she only appointed 3 women. LDP's alliance with the Osaka-based right-wing Japan Innovation Party, or Isshin no Kai, ensured her premiership because the opposition is not united. Takaichi's untested alliance is still short of a majority in both houses of parliament and will need to court other opposition groups to pass any legislation, a risk that could make her government unstable and short-lived. The 2 parties signed a coalition agreement on policies underscoring Takaichi's hawkish and nationalistic views. Their last-minute deal came after the Liberal Democrats lost its longtime partner, Buddhist-backed Komeito, which has a more dovish and centrist stance. Well, AP neglects to say friendly with China stance. Komeito is very much in cahoots with China, and so actually this will as AP is implying here, or actually they did say, didn't they, is going to move the LDP government or significantly to the right, probably, perhaps. But remember, her rivals within the LDP have also been given positions. The breakup threatened to a change of power for the LDP, which has governed Japan almost interrupted for decades. Tackling rising prices and other economic measures is the top priority for the Takaichi government. And in order to do that, she's going to be trying to influence the Bank of Japan to loosen the money supply or to increase the money supply. So we'll see what happens with that, right? But she says she wants to tackle rising prices. So that kind of a contradictory position there. And the JIP is what? Isshin no Kai, or JIP, or the Japan Innovation Party, ICMK. That's the English name for the Isshin no Kai. Okay. Does not hold ministerial posts in Takaichi's cabinet until his party is confident about its partnership with the LDP, Yoshimura has said. Takaichi is running on deadline as she prepares for a major policy speech later this week, talks with U.S. President Donald Trump, and regional summits. So she will also have to attend the APEC meeting in Korea uh, in a few days, actually, a week or so. She needs to quickly tackle rising prices and compile economy boosting measures by late December to address public frustration. So that's a problem, is it? Because tackling rising prices means tightening the money supply, right? But then compile economic boosting measures means loosening the money supply. So she has to do both. And that's going to be a trick. But she'll probably emphasize more of the economy boosting measures, I suspect. Um, while she is the first woman serving as Japan's prime minister, she is in no rush to promote gender equality or diversity. Takaichi is among Japanese politicians who have stonewalled measures for women's advancement. She supports the imperial family's male-only succession and opposes same-sex marriage and allowing separate surnames for married couples. Right. So different from Korea. Korea, the historical norm has been that women keep their surname when they get married. But that's not because, traditionally Korea has had uh, a strong sort of a gender equality, strong view in gender equality. No, that's wrong. Women have kept their surnames because their husbands' families don't want them to have their surnames and want to be able to kick the woman out of the family, the bride out of the family at any time, especially if she does not produce a male heir. That's why they've had them keep their surnames. But it's sort of become tradition now. Yeah. So anyway, so Japan, though, traditionally the woman has taken on the husband's surname, and the left is trying to change that. And I think actually now, no, it's still. I think still by law. I may be wrong, but I think still by law, husband and wife have to have the same surname, whether it's the husband's surname or the wife's surname. A protege of assassinated former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Takaichi is expected to emulate his policies, including a stronger military and economy, as well as revising Japan's pacifist constitution. Well, she's a long way from being able to do that because her party has so few seats in parliament. With her potentially weak grip on power, it's unknown how much Takaichi will be able to achieve. Also, an admirer of former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Takaichi was first elected to Parliament in 1993 and has served in a number of senior party and government posts, including as Minister of Economic Security and Internal Affairs, but her diplomatic background is thin. When Komeito left the governing coalition, it cited the LDP's lax response to slush fund scandals that led to their consecutive election defeats. The centrist party also raised concern about Takaichi's revisionist view of Japan's wartime past and her regular prayers at the Yasukuni Shrine, despite protests from Beijing and Seoul that see the visits as a lack of remorse about Japanese aggression, as well as her recent xenophobic remarks. There she is. You can see former Prime Minister Kishida there and former Prime Minister Kang. And this is Aso. And he's actually, I've said that he's sort of one of the big kingmakers in LDP. And it was his support really that put her over the top in the election for the party president. And so he is kind of the power behind the throne with Takaichi. And when they sit in the parliament, they all have their name posts here. Okay, and that's where is he here? And then this is her post here, right? Takaichi. I don't recognize anybody else here. Takaichi has toned down her hawkish rhetoric. On Friday, she sent a religious ornament instead of going to Yasukuni. Okay, so, all right. And this is how the election took place. I'm gonna watch this ad. Okay, all right. So anyway, Takaichi is now prime minister. For now, we'll see how long she lasts. Okay. All right, let's see what else is going on now. Where the truce is shaken. You would expect that, right, in the Middle East, but I guess they'll probably hold it together somehow. Okay. And Zelensky reports positive meeting with Trump. And we had a story yesterday about how they were yelling at each other. And somebody put out a statement saying that, well, that's not actually true, but who knows? Who knows? I think this is a appeals court. Trump can send the guard into Portland, Oregon. Trump says, I'm not a king. And I think the White House put out a statement saying that, if you were king, the government would never have shut down. Okay. Uh, okay. Whitley says, no king shows Democrats didn't learn from 24. Well, but they're trying to appeal to their base, especially to the radical base, because the radical bases are the ones that are going to be working for the party next autumn during the midterm elections. And so that's what they're doing here. All right. George Santos, I'm truly repentant. Right. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I don't think he is. I think he's going to find himself back in jail pretty soon. Okay. And Trump administration to cancel student debt for millions. Okay. That's going to increase the debt. And an agreement with the American Federation of Teachers. I guess a lot of teachers have debt, huh? Student debt. Under the deal, White House will restart processing student loan forgiveness for borrowers enrolled in two economic income-driven repayment programs, income contingent repayment and pay as you earn until they expire. These plans will be phased out by July 1, 2028, and a higher education expert estimated that the two programs together have more than 2.5 million enrollees. This is a tremendous win for borrowers. But today's filing, yeah, but what about for taxpayers? Who cares about the taxpayers, right? With today's filing, borrowers can rest a little easier, but not the taxpayers, right? Uh, Not the taxpayers. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, of course, when the whole system, the debt thing comes crashing down, these borrowers are going to have to pay anyway in terms of higher prices and the lack of jobs and so forth and so on. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. They're going to have to pay one way or another. And, okay, and Amazon, of course, has been having trouble, strangely. Do we know who was behind that? I don't think that we do we? Worldwide disruption could carry a staggering financial bill. Okay, and now back, fully mitigated an earlier failure. So what happened though? What happened? How did this happen? Began as AWS's U.S. East One region in Northern Virginia, a hub that powers many of the world's largest websites. It quickly spread, all right? But how did it happen? Exposes the fragility of modern digital infrastructure. Did it just sort of break at one point? What happened? Monday's event was one of the most far reaching scale of economic impact, likely to reignite debate over the risks of cloud concentration and the urgent need for stronger backup and diversification plans. So they're not telling us what actually happened. Hmm. Hmm. I don't see it. Do you see it? Yeah, I don't think they're telling us. Okay. All right, keep it a secret. Let's see here. Newsom picks new fight with Trump over shutdown. Yeah, so because he's going to run for president in the next time 2028, and so he wants to show the Democratic base that he's the one to go after Trump's successor, whoever that may be. All right. Okay. All right. All right. That's about it for today. I wasn't showing you that, was it? Okay. Let me show you some of these headlines that I was looking at. Israel said ceasefire aid to resume, and mediators step up diplomacy after Gaza truce shaken, but not broken, but shaken. J.D. Vance heads to Israel as fragile Gaza truce holds. So apparently it's holding. Trump says Hamas will be eradicated if group breaches Gaza deal. Canada Prime Minister will enforce ICC warrant if Netanyahu visits. Okay, well, that's about it. All right, so thank you for joining us this morning, and I hope you have a successful day. God bless Godspeed. May his kingdom come quickly.